Is the Google interview question everyone get wrong?
There is this famous Google interview question that everyone gets wrong. You're shrunk down to the size of a nickel and put into a blender. The blades will start spinning in 60 seconds. So what do you do?
I would like to think I could duck down and miss the blades.
Break the thing at the bottom, maybe?
Push the blade.
Ask nicely for the blender
Who actually says push what?
not to be turned on.
Tie my clothes together and then like use it as a rope, I guess?
If I was lighter, I could maybe catch a draft up.
Just accept defeat.
I mean, I'm the size of a nickel. What quality of life is that?
Okay, resonance. I'm gonna run to one wall, push on it, run to the other wall, push on it, run to the other wall. So I'm gonna tip the container over. Honestly, the thing I would think about
Yeah, no sword it actually
is
works.
trying to get to the very center of the blades. It's spinning around me, but
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too.
the actual RPM is probably not that high if I'm standing in the middle. I tie my clothes to one of the tips of the blades. As it's starting up, yeah, I get it to swing me around, and then I...
But these answers don't cut it. Now, I first heard about this problem in this book. It describes how each year Google received about 3 million applications, but they would only hire 7,000 people. That's a 0.2% acceptance rate. So one way to screen out millions of applicants was to use brain teasers. And the interviewers
This is what they ask,
would
Kamala.
make these up for fun.
We didn't get a list at that time of what questions to ask. We would share questions among each other.
Some of them gained traction. Questions like, how many golf balls can fit in a 747? Or how much should you charge to wash all the windows in Seattle? But the blender question really stuck with me, and I'm not alone.
You just lay back, enjoy that breeze. The best model in the world is only going to run maybe 10 or 11 hours. So we're getting out, and when we do, we're better off for it because whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
The question has been hotly debated in Reddit comment sections.
So they only want answers the interviewer wants. That's it.
There are so many different answers, but which one is the best?
I'll try to hide underneath the blades, I guess.
Hide under the blade, probably.
Great first reaction, but maybe that doesn't solve your problem entirely. Now you're just stuck inside of a spinning blender. So maybe you want to escape.
Can I climb the walls? Are there defects in the walls that are sufficiently large for me to grip onto? Do I have van der Waals forces that are strong enough to connect me to the wall? Am I like essentially a tiny gecko?
A gecko can stick to the wall of a blender even though neither its foot nor
I don't think human beings can do that.
glass are charged. The gecko's foot has to be pressed firmly against the glass, so its atoms are within a few nanometers
Yeah,
of the
Google didn't say that the person is a lizard person,
glass atoms.
like Mark Zuckerberg.
Then, at any moment, one atom's electrons aren't uniformly spread about the nucleus. They might be slightly more on one side than the other. This makes the atom momentarily slightly positively charged on one side and slightly negatively charged on the other. The glass atom next to it experiences the pull of this charge imbalance, and so a similar charge imbalance is induced on the glass atom. And therefore, the electrons in the glass atom are drawn to the nucleus of the gecko atom and vice versa. So there is a very weak attractive force between neutral atoms. This is known as a van der Waals force, and it's what makes geckos stick to walls. It's the same force that holds graphite together. There's no actual bonding between the layers of graphene in a pencil. It's like a stack of paper. The layers only stick because of van der Waals forces. Now, these forces are pretty weak, but since we're so small, maybe they'd be enough to help us climb out.
This I can almost certainly say. We wouldn't be sticky at that scale. And that's because the van der Waals type interactions are still small. And I studied cloning, so that of these types, cockroach and gecko, it turns out that you have to get very special to do that.
Geckos have millions of tiny branches on their feet that increase their surface area and allow them to mold to surfaces.
Yeah, I don't think human beings have that.
Our hands aren't like that, but ants and cockroaches don't rely on van der Waals forces, and they can still climb up walls. So maybe a miniature human could too.
The mechanism of a cockroach foot, and I used to know all about cockroach feet, is absolutely gorgeous. Same with a hand, by the way. There's two little claws, the intarsal claws. Those are things that slap down on a surface and really do slap when they're climbing, meters a second. Thwack, engage, despite having no adhesion, have very sophisticated frictional attachment.
Those claws can grip almost anything, even glass. While glass feels smooth to us, it's actually covered in tiny surface imperfections, and at insect scale, these features are significant.
Ants basically have climbing gear.
Well, yeah.
They're like using little like axes basically to pick their way in. We don't have the attachment discs or whatever that would be, or like the special claws or the van der Waals forces.
Yeah, make the handstand.
If you're that scale, our fingers are claws.
But we have 2 claws, really, and then our feet aren't great at climbing. I don't know.
Well, again, at that scale though, I don't know, right? Imagine putting a little sharp spike into your foot, then sharpen your shoes, wear high heel shoes. You'll be good to go.
So now I'm climbing in heels. But there's still a problem. I mean, I'll have to be pretty careful placing each hand and foot slowly. It's gonna take longer than 60 seconds to get out. And in that time, the blades will have started spinning. One mistake, and I'm a smoothie. So Google was looking for a different answer.
Okay, now we're going to the physics building. Maybe they know?
Yeah, I really got nothing. I'm stumped.
This is so embarrassing. We're in like our last year of our degree. We should definitely know this.
I feel like I could probably swing running around the sides and yeeting myself out.
Okay, if we're just talking about the entropy, it should increase
What is he talking about?
at some point. So some sort of chaos should be. None of the system will stay undisrupted. I think that is a limit to infinity and I'll be chilling. Like using that logic, if I just like extrapolate, right? No, that's still too big for me to quantum tunnel or anything like that.
Whoa, 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 whoa. I mean, that is really
Teleportation, what?
overthinking it. It's actually not that complicated.
Do you want to hear the best answer I've heard yet?
Sure.
Just jump.
Just jump? How would that work?
Just jump.
How?
Does that work like that?
Jump where?
Out of the blender, just go up.
So whoever told you that is...
It's crazy, right? Yeah. That makes sense to you?
No, it doesn't, but...
Do you want to hear?
So I guess human is a Spider-Man after all.
Yeah, tell me how it works.
Jumping out of a blender seems impossible because at nickel size, the wall of a blender is 15 times your height. It'd be like leaping over an 8-story building. But watch these clips. Did you notice it? A
No.
horse, a dog, and a squirrel. They all jump to about the same height. This is exactly what Alfonso Borelli, the father of biomechanics, looked at in the 17th century. As he put it, in the same conditions, smaller and lighter animals make bigger jumps relative to their body, if the other conditions are equal, and indeed the limbs and the other organs are in the same proportion. The dog will jump as far as the horse. Now, sure, there is variation. A species whose survival depends on jumping will be optimized for it, while others, like turtles and elephants, they don't jump at all. But when you consider
Yeah, I wanna see elephants jump.
huge variations in
meter.
size, I mean, a horse is 1,500 times heavier than a squirrel. It's incredible that they jump to around the same height. And it's not because squirrels are super muscly or
Yeah, what if the human have the
something.
sedentary
Horses and
lifestyle?
squirrels have similar muscle to weight percentages, and insects have even less muscle relative to their weight.
Why do you think an ant can lift 50 times its own body weight? Like, is it any more muscular? No, you guys hit the gym, come on. Like, you're more muscular than an ant.
So how are small things so strong? Well, if you look closely at a muscle, it's made up of tiny units called sarcomeres. They act like miniature springs. How far a muscle compresses depends on how many of these springs are in series. But the strength of a muscle depends only on how many are working in parallel. So the thicker the muscle, the more springs are in parallel and the greater the strength. Therefore, strength depends on the cross-sectional area of a muscle. And as animals shrink, this cross-sectional area scales down with the square of their height. But an animal's weight is proportional to its volume, so that scales with the cube of their height. So as you scale down, weight decreases faster than strength, and as a result, smaller animals have much higher strength to weight ratios.
I mean, you could probably lift your own weight. Like if you were to put your own body weight on your back and squat that, you could now lift 100
100 times.
Yeah.
let's go.
And for us stuck in that blender, that extra strength relative to our weight means we could jump right out.
Your surface area decreases with the square. You'd be like a little Superman.
I see, okay.
That's really cool. So I could jump like literally out of a blender.
You could jump out of a blender.
But in movies and games where people are shrunk, they almost never show it like that.
Honey, I Shrunk the Kids was one of my favorite movies when I was a kid. I love that.
Tiny people struggle picking up scissors. They almost get crushed by raindrops. If it was scientifically accurate, they'd actually be overpowered. Most people don't think of this when they first hear the question. The answer
So Ant-Man is a lie, come on.
almost seems too simple.
When you ask the right questions, you define the problem. There's some really obvious solutions that work. And that's actually true for a lot of problems in the real world too.
Now, I'm all for obvious solutions, but from the start, the answer of jumping out didn't sit right with me.
Even this idea of like, I'm gonna jump out of the blender, like that doesn't make sense to me because jumping is not just like, okay, how strong you are relative to your weight, it's also timing and your kinetics and all that. So like, how long can you be in touch with the ground? How much can you apply that force in one burst, like over a really short period?
Would it be fair to say you're overthinking things? You gotta suspend your disbelief somewhere.
I think if you like factor in all the potential challenges a human would have, just like if they're just all of a sudden that size, they don't have like time to practice using their legs and stuff in that new environment. Like,
These are purely hypothetical.
I don't give them very good chances of jumping out.
Sometimes there are people who make everything more complex than it needs to be. And that can be problematic.
I would like to see like, you know, realistic modeling of like, we scale me down 100 times. Like, can I jump higher? Like, I want to see someone do those physics equations. Like, yeah, you could jump higher, but you couldn't jump 100 times higher, you know?
So that's why we got the researchers at Georgia Tech's biomechanics lab to investigate. While they are figuring
Just make a miniature robot human.
that out, let me tell you about today's sponsor, Incogni. Every time you browse the internet, sign up for a newsletter, or even just buy something online, at least 30 centimeters to get out.
I was like, well, what about me? Like, I'm pretty, embarrassingly non-athletic. What if I do this? And I did it right here next to my desk. My partner sort of measured my jump height, and I know how much I weigh and all that stuff. So what would it look like for me? If we have a person that weighs 84 kilograms, is squatting 15 centimeters, and has a jump height of 27 centimeters, that person, if they were scaled down to 1% of their original size, they would jump 42 centimeters high.
The simple simulation
42 centimeters.
shows a
That's
jump
it.
height of 42 centimeters. So you would make it out, but we need to add in air resistance. Since our cross-sectional area is now 100 times larger relative to our weight, drag should have a greater effect at nickel size.
If it was 42 centimeter jump height before for the jumper, with drag, considering drag, then it's about 39 centimeters. So we do decrease in jump height a little bit.
But that drag calculation is assuming you jump perfectly vertically. But what if you're a bit uncoordinated and you flip onto your side mid-jump? Well, then you're exposing 10 times the surface area, and that increases the amount of air resistance.
Like if somehow you flipped and you were still moving up like this,
You
like,
just pause and dies.
what is the air resistance then? So doing that means 22 centimeter jump height. Oh, so we don't, oh darn. If you start getting overconfident and you wanted to do like a backflip while you were at it, then you're gonna mess it up, yeah.
Don't backflip out of the blender is a good piece of advice.
Don't try and show off. You're trying to not get chopped up. Just go head first.
It's not so much getting out of the blender, it's what happens next.
You've got 2 nickel-sized men free in the world. Think of the possibilities.
The simulation came back, you can jump out of the freaking blender.
All right, okay. I'm glad we went through this this exercise.
Do you want me to do another month of research on this?
No, like you've done enough. You've done enough. I'm convinced.
I feel like jumping is an unsatisfactory answer. It was unsatisfactory when you mentioned it in the first place,
And
Yeah, he's kind of
you
stupid.
went through and you got the simulation, you got the model, and you're like, look, you know, our little guy can jump 40 centimeters, so are you convinced now? And I'm like, I guess? But like, my spidey sense was tingling.
Oh, what's it
There's
now?
something going on. You're telling me that I have to apply a force in 1/1000th of a second, and I have to undergo 278 Gs. I'm not gonna survive that. So what I'm getting now is that like my intuition was good. I think everyone's intuition who's like, you can't jump out of a blender, I think they're right. And you may say, well, that's overthinking it, but that's the whole point of the brain teaser, is to overthink it, is to get to that point where you're thinking about it in the detail of like what would actually be feasible.
A whole lot of things would go wrong. Our hearts have to generate a certain amount of pressure to get the blood, you know, going up to our head and going all the way down. If you take the human heart and shrink it down, it's not going to be able to generate the same kinds of forces. I think it would be a catastrophe at a smaller size. Controlling air pressure inside these countless sacs inside of our lungs. There's an exquisite balance there. Now you try to take that same design and squeeze it down. I would be skeptical that you'd be able to keep the passageways open. You wouldn't even be able to think this through because you just wouldn't have the brain structures that we have. You can't fit 86 billion neurons in a nickel-sized volume. You can't scale cells down either. That's the thing. Like, cells are cells. I mean, jumping out would be, to me, seems like your only
Here's a chance.
option, but I don't think
Thanks.
you're going to be able to jump because you can't breathe and your heart can't pump blood. So you just keel over and die before you can make your jump.
Okay, so if you're a biologist, you think we'd die. If you're a physicist, you can decide whether we'd be little Superman or, as I believe, incapable of fully harnessing our extra strength.
What did Borelli know? He didn't even have blenders. He doesn't know the stress.
But if you're an interviewer at Google, you might not even care what the answer is.
I think one of the misconceptions that candidates have is when I'm asked this question, it's because they want to see
It's about the confidence of the answer.
if I can solve this problem. That's actually not quite right. There are 5 attributes people are looking for. There's addressing ambiguity, there's breaking down the problem, being creative, being smart, and then communication.
So I guess like none of those 5 are whether it's correct.
Right.
We're the idiots who went and tried to figure out what's the best of those answers.
Yes.
So just ask more questions, that easy.
Google realized that asking these types of questions didn't make much sense. Laszlo Bock, the senior vice president of people operations at Google, said this: on the hiring side, we found that brain teasers are a complete waste of time. How many golf balls can you fit into an airplane? How many gas stations are in Manhattan? A complete waste of time. They don't predict anything. They serve
No, just say, I don't know.
primarily to make the interviewer feel smart.
But I just feel like there's that moment where you're like, so are you going to admit you're wrong? And I'm like, yeah, you know? I think this is further to like, I'm not wrong. This is crazy. This question is crazy. And I think it goes to your very point, which is that like brain teasers like this are not good ways to assess whether people know what they're talking about.
So, although brain teasers aren't useful to assess job applicants, they are useful for something. I mean, every time we ask this question to people on the street, to physics students, and to scientists, they lit up. They had to try to see the world from a new perspective. And it's exactly this way of thinking that has led to some of the biggest scientific discoveries. Einstein used thought experiments to come up with his theory of relativity. Euler's solution to the bridges of Königsberg puzzle is what inspired graph theory. And when Schrödinger wanted to illustrate his problems with quantum mechanics, he imagined a cat in a torture box. The blender question is admittedly silly, but silly questions can yield profound answers and show us new things.
Wait, so what's the answer actually?
I think
They
in
think
order
it
to
one.
learn something new, you have to be willing to embrace the ridiculous and just go with it.
That's it, come on now.